Hello and welcome to the Agile Speaker. In Season 4, we're turning the spotlight onto the speakers. I want to capture stories, experiences and helpful takeaways from clients I've worked with over the years, so you, our listeners, hear from the speakers themselves rather than advice from me. They come from a range of different sector, different sizes of business, different experience and background, but what connects them all is they've all taken to the stage, presented in the boardroom, pitched to investors, or have had to influence audiences in some way. As you'll hear, I had such a great time catching up with all of them. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversations and find their advice and top tips helpful. Today, I'm delighted to have Barbara Mills, Deputy Programme Director of CivTech, with me. CivTech is a programme which takes problems that public sector organisations need to solve, like, for example, climate or health or housing challenges, and invites innovative people and businesses to work with the public sector to solve them and build successful businesses in the process. Barbara, thanks so much for coming along. It's lovely to see you. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Maryanne. We are currently in the middle of interviewing for CivTech 7. So every day for me at the moment is doing interviews with people with lots of really innovative proposals for our latest batch of challenges that we've set. It's extremely busy, but also an extremely exciting time in the process. So yeah, really good, thank you.
Fantastic. Awesome. I can't believe how many CivTechs have come through now. It feels like just when one has finished up, the next one is already on the go again. We first met back in the very early days of CivTech, back in, I think it was 2016, where I was delivering the presentation skills workshops for the CivTech beta cohort, the first cohort on the CivTech programme. And I was helping all the company founders to articulate the value proposition clearly, be it to perhaps investors or maybe potential partners in the futures or customers, and of course, crucially, to the challenge sponsors they were working with. I ran a series of workshops throughout the 12-week accelerator program, helping each of the teams with their preparation and delivery of pitches and presentations. And of course, this culminated in Demo Day, where each team at the end of that 12-week accelerator has to deliver a short presentation followed by questions to an audience. I think that year it was probably about 200 people at the Edinburgh International Conference Centre. Mm-hmm. Now, back then, I think your role was effectively as a project manager, and your role has changed hugely over the years as CivTech has grown. So what has changed for you?
Yeah, a huge amount has changed. So as you say, I was effectively kind of project managing individual challenges. But since then, CivTech as a program, at that stage, CivTech was a kind of interesting experimental idea. We were delivering a handful of projects or challenges, as we call them, a year. And we've now grown to a program which has over £40 million worth of Scottish Government funding behind it. We're a significant contributor to things like the Programme for Government and the National Strategy for Economic Transformation. I guess my role has changed alongside that growth with the programme from, in the first instance, just trying to get the process to work, doing the kind of hands-on delivery, working very directly with the companies going through the process, to now being much more about scaling our program, scaling our ability to deliver more and more challenges each year, building the team, building the systems that we're using so that we can scale and deliver real impact, because ultimately that is what we're all about. We're wanting to try and improve the public services across Scotland and deliver impact.
Brilliant. And I think it would be helpful actually for listeners to understand, maybe if we give some examples of the sort of challenges that have been presented from the public sector and the sort of businesses who have answered them?
Sure. Yeah. This is one of the things I love about working on the CivTech programme. We get to work with effectively any public or third sector organisation who has a challenge that they want to try and solve. We've worked with the NHS in Scotland. We've worked with a variety of different local authorities, Glasgow City Council, Edinburgh City Council. We've worked with charities, including Citizens Advice Scotland. I was just talking to somebody today about a challenge that was brought to us by Forestry and Land Scotland. The challenge that they brought to us was that we need to grow a huge number more trees a year in order to meet our own climate change targets in relation to tree planting. But there is actually a limited supply of tree seed. So our ability to grow those trees is dependent upon our ability to make the most of that tree seed. Now, naturally, in the commercial process of growing trees, you actually lose a whole lot of that seed because of drought, because of other conditions that happen during the process of growing trees. So they came to us with this really big problem. We worked with a number of companies on that challenge, but one of them was a startup called CivBio, a one-woman STEM-based startup looking at how effectively seed coatings and soil conditioners might be able to help deal with the issues of drought conditions and the different ways that drought conditions can affect tree seed germination. Now, Alicia's gone on from setting up the business through the CivTech process to end up being CivBio as a team. I think they're employing about 4 or 5 people now. They've secured £500,000 in funding to do other R&D work with DEFRA. And yeah, they're going from strength to strength with products that are going to be really, really important for us in terms of helping meet our climate change goals. So that's one example.
So what's so interesting is that for each challenge, each public sector organisation, whether it's Scottish Government or Forestry Land Scotland, or I remember SEPA took part in it a few years ago as well, they come forward with a problem that they need solved. And the big challenge is that there's always a massive procurement. Well, there used to be a huge procurement process that a company would have to go through. And you'd have to be a pretty well-established, probably quite a good sizable team to be able to get through those procurement processes in the past, wouldn't you? But what CivTech does is that it just minimizes that and makes it open to anyone to attempt. And as you say, CivBio, I remember I don't think she even had a business incorporated, did she?
No.
Whereas Amicus was established a few years old. And then in the last few years, you've had companies who are very well established businesses with larger teams answering the call as well. Here we are 6 years later, and we're now on CivTech 7, which is the interviews that you're doing now. How many companies have actually been through the programme now?
Over 75 companies that have been through the programme overall. We hope to see roughly another 20 or so go through just this year. And we can see that sort of proportionate increase because of the funding that we've been awarded through the Scottish Government to scale the programme, which is really exciting.
And yes, so much has been achieved. So many companies have been through, and in those 75 companies, so many of them have grown, and then they've been able to employ wider teams, find more clients. The impact that CivTech has made is just phenomenal. So in this season of the Agile Speaker podcast, I'm hoping to capture stories, experiences, helpful takeaways from people like yourself I've worked with. And I have worked with yourself, and I've also worked with all the companies that go through CivTech, just so that our listeners can hear from the speakers themselves as opposed to advice from me. Now, as you know, I always talk about how the word presentation often makes us think about only the formal situations. People think large audience, slides, all eyes on you. But as you know, presentation covers a whole spectrum of different critical communications. And they can be those formal situations, but they can also be informal, 1-to-1, 1-to-10, 2 or 3 of you on the CivTech team presenting to bring on a new challenge sponsor. So it's different formats, different setup. And I believe in the need to be agile across all of these situations and to be able to move from one to the next easily. Mm-hmm. So with that definition in mind, could you give me a snapshot of the different situations that you're involved in day to day where you're presenting?
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you sort of give that sort of summary, because right now, one of the most important bits of work that I'm delivering personally is CivTech started out delivering relatively ad hoc projects or challenges. We'd go and speak to individual people within individual organizations. What we're doing at the moment is trying to get a lot more strategic about how we are focusing our time and effort and the funding that's been put behind us. So we're working on this idea of missions. These are, instead of talking about an individual challenge, trying to get the public sector organizations we work with to identify bigger missions that might be delivered over a few years. Okay. And we've started this work started off dealing with Nature Scott.
Yeah.
Who we've worked with on lots of challenges, and they're an absolutely fantastic challenge sponsor. But this idea of more strategic missions it's not quite as tangible as give us an individual project.
Yeah.
It is, let's set something as a collective goal that we can go and achieve together. So in terms of that point of view of needing to be agile, that involves, in the first instance, largely your kind of one-to-one engagement with chief executive and director level, so that you can pitch not just the CivTech programme, but the potential for the CivTech programme to achieve more for those public sector organisations that we're engaging with. We're often then engaging with a collection of the sort of senior leadership teams and the senior management teams. But again, you're kind of presenting to their groups of leaders.
Okay.
And then with Nature Scott, we've ended up taking that down to the level of then presenting into individual sort of technical teams or groups of specialists that have interests in particular areas.
Yeah.
You're finding there that you're speaking to completely different audiences, pitching what is roughly speaking the same idea, but it all has to be tailored to the specific audience. And of course, the delivery format in which you're doing this in the current circumstances can be varied. I think that particularly when you're trying to kind of lead people into something that is uncomfortable ground, without the right skills to be thinking about your presentation skills, how you are presenting to each audience, you're going to fall at the first hurdle. Not going to get an idea that's as intangible as this to be able to move forward. So it's really, really critical. I absolutely agree.
And in those different situations, so different sizes of audience, different types of audience, are you also delivering it in different ways where sometimes you might have slides for one type of audience, and then others, it may just be you're kind of either on a Teams call or you're across the table chatting to them through ideas with some notes on your notepad. Is it different in that sense as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Thinking about your experience of all of those different situations, how would you describe that? If you think about maybe, I mean, not necessarily even start CivTech, but before that, earlier in your career, and thinking about what your journey has been like when it comes to presenting.
I cut my teeth working in South Essex on London 2012 Olympics related development projects.
Okay.
the first time I found myself doing significant presentations to a significant audience, it was to public consultations for development that was going to be happening in the backyards of these people that were going to be affected. Their roads were going to be dug up.
Yeah.
We were going to be doing things in their green spaces. It was not easy at all. But I think that in those circumstances, though, I just had so much of a kind of grasp of the detail of the project, as well as an understanding that in those circumstances, what you're really ultimately needing to be able to do is balance the wanting to give people as much information as you can give them without promise something that you don't know is going to happen. So it was much more about the process of managing a public consultation than it was necessarily about presenting. And projects like that, they do have a certain amount of momentum when you'll have done feasibility work, you'll have a whole lot of data sitting behind you, etc. What I actually found myself being really confident in those situations in the end, and actually really enjoying a lot of the work that I did and getting to know certain kind of characters in different areas and things. But what it didn't really equip me with was the idea of how to successfully pitch an idea. Because when I didn't have all of that data, all of the feasibility work, all of the momentum that comes with a large project like the Olympics behind me, when instead you're trying to pitch a vision or an idea and convince people to buy into something just to get it off the ground, it's much, much harder. So I went personally from feeling like relatively early in my career that I was a pretty competent public communicator and presenter, to then finding that as I needed to move on with sort of pitching and convincing people to get things off the ground, I kind of lost some confidence in my own ability to pitch at that point. I find that quite sort of, I remember analysing it and trying to understand it. I guess that was where, when I was lucky also to come across you around the same time.
And so that was just around the start of CivTech, when, the whole thing was so new, wasn't it? And huge amount of, as you say, pitching that vision of what it could be. And my goodness, what a success it's become as a result of all of you doing that over the years. So if you were thinking back to any of those situations, perhaps it was the early days of CivTech, what would you say was the most stressful experience that you've had? And how did you handle it? Or what did you do to ensure that you were able to still deliver what you needed to deliver?
So this is something that I've thought about a couple of times. And there was a particular situation where the biggest audience and the highest profile presentation I gave was actually at one of our pre-pandemic demo days. So you mentioned the demo days, this culmination of the accelerator. We try and build a lot of excitement around it. We get lots of engagement from, potential investors, from high-profile people across the public and private sector. We have also been fortunate enough to have cabinet secretaries and ministers come and speak at demo days. And the biggest demo day we held, I think, was at 2019 at the EICC. We had over 600 people there in the audience. As a team, we developed this idea that we would all collectively be involved in the presentation of Demo Day. And I drew the slot immediately after the Cabinet Secretary was speaking at the 2019 Demo Day. And
no pressure.
I had that, I had that moment as well of then walking out onto the stage at the EIC with full lighting rig, the light shining in your eyes. And I had a complete mind blank. And I have to say that if it was not for I think that the most important thing was the pausing technique that you talk about, which helped keep me calm, because as long as I felt that this was still legitimately just a pause before I spoke, I thought, don't hurry. just relax. And then I have my note cards there, which I didn't use. I never used until that day. And I got them out, then was able to go, and everything was fine. But so that was stressful.
Yeah.
But it worked out well in the end. It was just one of those moments of, gosh, I really am having that moment of, the rabbit in the headlights and not really being able to think. And the techniques that you equipped us with were just invaluable for that.
The interesting thing is, Barbara, I'm looking back thinking about that, and I don't remember that happening to you at all. So, because you're all really well prepared. You always have, so you were all taking part in hosting the day, essentially. So before each presentation, you'd have one of your team doing the introductory piece for those groups. And you all have a script for the whole day, but I think did something change at the last minute, or I don't know. But I don't remember noticing anything happening. So it's interesting that that technique of just using silence and then checking those notes and then being able to move on acts like a camouflage for the audience, because I don't think anyone would have even realized it was happening.
And it was just that little thing that happened where, before going on, being told, oh, can you just change this bit? And I was trying to remember what I'd been asked to change while I was done. And then just the first opening bits of what I was going to say just went out of my mind completely. But and that's the sort of thing that I'm generally pretty relaxed when I'm up in front of people. I mean, I think you've probably seen me, and I find I've got quite a conversational style. I'm not really particularly well suited to those big auditoria as a result, because you're much more on that broadcast. But I think it was definitely invaluable. I think, though, if I could say something about the other times, because I was thinking that's definitely the most obvious time that I found it difficult, but I don't like every discussion turning into a discussion about the pandemic, but the reality is the pandemic has had a huge impact on how we all present. For me, that ended up being that we did our demo days online. I did everything from my kitchen table. I wasn't for I think it was 18 months. I didn't go into the office at all. And then we had to do a series. We got the fortunate opportunity to be able to put on a series of events at COP26. That was the first time. So at COP26, there was a venue within the Scottish Government building. We were hosting an international delegation, and the audience was a relatively modest sort of size of audience. It was sort of maybe 50 or 60 people. And I think it was like I had to learn the skills over again, because I think that if you're not using the skills, you lose them. And I found that very, very stressful as well, because for me, presenting is about more than having it as one of the skills on the list of skills that you need to be able to function effectively. For me, being confident presenting is also about self-belief. And I think that feeling like you came out of the pandemic and that skill had somehow eroded was really quite a big thing for me. So it was about going back to some of those things that you'd highlighted and trying to build those back up again. And by the time we got to our demo day for this year, which we did as a hybrid event, I was back to feeling a lot more confident again. So it's funny how these things can change, even though you feel like you've got the skills nailed, and then things happen, or you're not practicing them so much.
Definitely. That's really interesting, the way that you just talked about it, because randomly, as another connection with CivTech, Steve Keyworth from Environmental Systems, who did CivTech 6 in the this last run that you did, he sent me an email afterwards and said, you don't teach people how to present, you teach people how to be a presenter. And I thought, that's really interesting. I've never thought about it in that way, but it's a very Yeah, it's just a very slight but quite an impactful difference, isn't it? But I wanted to also just mention, some of the companies that have come through CivTech as well. And I mean, they've been a vast array, as we were saying earlier, people who have literally not even started the business yet. One person, one man, one woman bands to much larger corporates. We've had such a vast array of different characters, experiences, people, who are used to presenting, people who are not. The one I think that stands out to me was, and it comes back to that Forestry and Land Scotland tree seed challenge that you talked about, Michael from Cumbria Tree Growers. And he applied for that challenge because he runs a nursery down in Cumbria, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he will be so far my standout person from the whole of CivTech companies, because I remember in the first session that I had with him and his group in Codebase, and I always ask everybody about their experience presenting. And he said, I don't have any. And I said, so just day to day, though, are you having meetings with customers? Are you ever doing anything like that? And he said, no, I don't. And I said, do you make phone calls? Literally, do you ever talk to anybody? I was trying to glean what sort of experience he had. And he said, no, it's all done by email and inquiries come through my website. He said, I don't talk to people. I absolutely hate the thought of public speaking and presenting. I can't do it. And I remember sitting there thinking, has anyone told him that he's going to be presenting to 700 people in 12 weeks' time? Did he not read that bit of brief?
Yeah.
I was thinking, oh my goodness. And he looked like a rabbit in the headlights in that first workshop. But we went through all of the workshops that I deliver, and he actually went for having a full script and standing at the lectern on demo day. And he was amazing. He was a brilliant writer. He wrote the most fantastic script for himself. And I taught him how to present with a script, which is quite a different, it's quite a, there are techniques for doing that so that you don't look like you're speaking from a script. You just look like you're checking notes. So I taught him how to do that. And I remember on the day he got up on that stage, he delivered it. And afterwards, his wife came over to me and gave me a huge hug.
Yeah.
And said, none of us can believe he's done it. This is something that he'd been utterly petrified by. And there he was. And actually, I think he quite enjoyed it. So it was just such a remarkable journey to see and experience through the accelerator program, and to see how empowering that was for him.
I think that, I do remember particularly, I remember Michael because I remember taking him into the interview and collecting him to take him into the original interview they got into. And he did say, I don't think I'm going to like this very much. I'm not even very comfortable on the phone.
Oh.
So we'll just see how this goes.
Yeah.
But the fact is, he was an individual with an idea and the right skills. I mean, the idea with CivTech is that you've got to be able to bring the right idea and the right knowledge that means you're going to be able to build a business from that idea. And there are some things that we can equip a participant with. And there's certain things that we can kind of be confident about. And thanks to working with you, Maryanne, one of those things is definitely those pitching and presentation skills. But to me, it also comes back to that matter of self-belief.
Yeah.
Because so much about people's belief in their own products, their business, the solution that they're developing. If you are speaking to them about it in the right circumstances, you can see the potential.
Yeah.
But that doesn't matter at all unless they're able to do that under those different circumstances you mentioned earlier. So whether it's the one-to-one, whether it's the small group, and you never know when you're going to be presented with the opportunity to be able to, whether it's investment, whether it's a potential new customer, you've got to be able to respond so quickly to those different circumstances. So yes, you taught him to do one particular thing in terms of that particular pitch, but it was the wider self-belief, I think, as well, that you see being so beneficial. That translates then when you are talking in those different formats into those different scales of audience.
Exactly. And when you did speak to him, if you didn't have, the spotlight on him, if you were just chatting to him in Codebase, he could chat. He's a really personable guy, and that just comes back to my whole approach is about the fact we can all do this when we're relaxed. Mm-hmm. When you don't feel like the spotlight's on you, we can all speak to each other. But it's when the spotlight's on you, that's when people start to feel anxiety and stress and things. Be good just to talk about how the impact of having that skill and the self-belief that you've talked about, what kind of impact that's had on you and perhaps in the team that you're working with at CivTech as well.
Yeah, it definitely has had a huge impact, because it's probably the case in both the private and the public sector. But those presentation skills, that ability to get up in front of different types of audience. Of course, you're not getting up always now, are you? There's the practical issue of, if you've only got one or two people in a team who are the ones that are capable of presenting and promoting, then your ability to grow and expand and get the for us, the new challenge sponsors we need and the new companies joining is going to be limited. So practically speaking, we need those presentation skills throughout the team. But then there's this second aspect of that over the years that I've been working at CivTech, there's the way that my role has changed and progressed from managing projects to now being the deputy program director.
Yeah.
And that's reflected in the other members of the team as well. We've seen all of the members of our team really kind of grow. It sounds a wee bit pretentious maybe, but grow professionally and as people. And a lot of that comes from them facing situations in which they're not comfortable, maybe initially, but then seeing that they can actually develop the skills that they need in order to be able to, whether it's present directly. We do a lot of videos at CivTech, and it tends to be the thing that people are most uncomfortable about doing. Yeah, it's that thing of that you don't get the feedback from a camera, and also that frankly you can feel pretty silly when you're videoing yourself in your kitchen, trying to say grand things about innovation, etc. It is those skills, and the fact that we have, you mentioned that the whole team gets involved in presenting at Demo Day, the whole team get involved in the videos we produce. It gives the team both the practical presenting skills, but also a feeling of real ownership over the mission that we have as a team. Yeah. If you've only got a handful of people that are presenting that information, it's harder for the rest of the team to necessarily feel as bought into, why are we doing this? Why does it matter? So the kind of skills that the team has developed through working with you in the workshop program that you do have meant that we've grown the capacity we have to be able to do more work, but also it's been a great bit of personal and professional development, really.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's also, it's good for everyone to know how it feels, isn't it? Seeing for each of you to all be hosting on stage, taking part, for everybody to understand the work and the effort and the skills and everything that's involved in doing that. I think that's also a really positive thing for a team, isn't it?
Yeah, and you shouldn't underestimate as well that can change the perception people have. We've got a member of the team. She won't thank me for saying this, but a lady called Leslie, who she's Scottish, but she's got an Italian accent and grew up speaking Italian, and she can often be quite worried about her presentation in English. Mm-hmm. And she can be quite worried about whether or not she's communicating clearly. she's one of the best presenters we have in the team.
Yeah.
She's brilliant on video.
Yeah.
And she's just really good. And I think that she gets that feedback when she does it, not just from the team, but from other people. So being able to help people to see themselves differently is really, really important.
I thought it'd be useful for our listeners, if you were to think about the presentations that you make and all the different things that you've maybe, heard from workshops I've done with you, or if you've done any of the Agile Speaker online program, which I think you guys had access to last year.
Yeah.
If you were to pick out 3 tips or tactics or tricks of the trade, things that, your sort of go-to top 3 things that you would do if you're asked to make a presentation that have made a big impact on how you handle it, what would those be?
For me, it's definitely the pausing is really, I've not got it down at all yet. I'm, as somebody who would generally talk quite quickly and not very clearly, the pausing and slowing down generally have been critical in terms of the practicalities. Then I think the third one is probably the most important, because I think that, I'm trying to remember when it was, Maryanne, but I think it might have been very, very early on and after one of your workshops. And I talked to you about trying to be able to speak more naturally as I would speak, instead of putting on a persona.
Yeah.
And you really helped with me being able to find my own style in a way which was, delivering. And I've seen you do it since, with people who will come in and they're not presenting as themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I often find a lot of what I do at the moment needs to be able to come across. I'm going to be a little bit controversial maybe and say that I think a lot of people talk a lot about innovation. They talk there's a lot of jargon. I use the jargon myself. And I think with a lot of people in the public sector and a lot of people who are focused on practical hands-on delivery, that can result in quite high levels of skepticism.
Yeah.
Frankly, it sounds like nonsense. People who do very practical things can be very skeptical about whether or not you've actually got something that's worthwhile them putting their time and effort into.
Yeah.
And so authenticity is really, really important when I'm communicating. And it's really easy for me to lose it because I do go into this sort of presenter mode sometimes. So reminding myself, does that actually sound like me speaking?
Yeah. Or is it a layer of language that sometimes it's easy to pick up this language, a layer of language that isn't necessarily the way that you would naturally speak. But it's easy to pick it up if you're in amongst it all of the time, because it just becomes the norm within the organization.
So those I think are probably the 3: the pausing, the slowing down, and then that kind of trying to keep that, looking at the language and asking yourself, is that how I would speak to somebody sitting across the table from me?
Brilliant. Great. And all interconnected, because it's all about using your conversational style, whether it's to do with the language that you use or using the natural gaps that we all use in conversation, which then help to, make that pace listener driven so that the audience is able to follow you all the way through. Fantastic. 3 top tips. I love those. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to wrap up, it's been really super to speak to you, Barbara. Really lovely to chat to you. And thank you so much again for joining me. I really appreciate your time. And I'm very excited about CivTech 7 and hopefully see you face to face later on in the year at Codebase when the workshops I'm delivering for CivTech 7 kick off.
Look forward to it.
So if anybody listening would like to find out more about CivTech, go to www.civtech.scott. And finally, if you want to learn how to be a presenter and be agile across all of your critical communications, then please go to www.maryannejohnston.co.uk for information on our courses or to get in touch.